Love that robot voice. So this is the first in the Magic and Mysticism lecture series that I will be doing on here. And I'm super excited. I put like a question poll thing out on Instagram about like, what do people want, what should I do it about? And the consensus was Grail stuff. And that's one of my favorite topics. So I want to get started with a practice that I developed or received, however you want to look at it. It's a short and simple invocation, and it serves kind of a similar purpose to like a, lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram type thing for people who are familiar. I'm gonna move back a little bit so you can see me. You can feel free to do this with me. I'm gonna explain the process, or you can not do it as you feel comfortable. So to start out, you connect with heaven. That is, imagine that the top wall of the universe, infinitely high above you, is an ocean of white light. And you're going to put your hands in front of your heart, kind of in a prayer posture, and you're making the Greek letter alpha by doing this with your arms down at an angle. You're going to say, this very place, the Garden of Paradise. And then on an inhale, you're going to pull a ray or stream from that ocean of white light infinitely far above you through the crown of your skull into a golden chalice that you're visualizing in your heart on an inhale. And then on the exhale, you're going to let it overflow, and it spills out in front of you and behind you and to your right and to your left, forming kind of rivers. Stretching out to the horizon of white light. And wherever that water, that light touches the ground beneath you, you're going to visualize it just blossoming with all kinds of life and flowers and vegetation. And then you're going to move your hands to kind of to be, at your sides up, sort of near the top of your head, forming like a curved lowercase W, forming the Greek letter omega. And you're going to mentally connect with the core of the earth, this sort of red source of the immanent presence of the divine, all of the energy that we receive from the source, the intelligence of the planet itself. You're going to say, this very heart, the Holy Grail. And on an inhale, you're going to pull a pulse of that red light up through from the core of the earth, through the central channel, into that chalice. And the red is going to mix with the white in the golden chalice in your heart. And you're going to hold your breath. You're going to kind of tone your pelvic floor and almost sort of close off your throat a little bit so that it's like you're pressurizing that energy. And then as you feel the energy or the chalice glowing brighter and brighter and warmer and warmer and more radiant, when it reaches an apex, you're going to exhale forcefully and have that energy move outwards from the chalice in a sphere of golden flame, just pushing any unneeded, any unbalanced, any unhelpful energies out of your aura, out of your sphere. And that golden sphere of flame is going to stand around you. And then you're going to cross your arms over your chest, turn your head to the left, and you're forming the Chi Rho symbol, the Greek letters Chi and Rho. And you're going to attune to your blood. You're going to attune, if you can, to the feeling of love that rides the blood. you're going to say, blessed be the Sangreal. So the Sangreal is often given as the name for the Holy Grail. Sang, meaning holy, the same root as saint, and Grial or Grail. But it's written as one word. And so there's sort of various interpretations of what that means, because you can also split the word into two instead of at sun, but actually at sang, which would be blood, and real, which would be royal. And so this is the perfect place to start this talk off, because a lot, like the question that I get all the time is like, what is the Holy Grail? Like, what does that even mean? And the Grail is the heart. The Grail is the subtle heart, esoterically. And so doing this practice, what you're doing is, there's different things. You're attuning to the powers of Eden and the, Grail mysteries, and sort of doing different Christian symbols, or Christian mystical symbols, but not in an orthodox way. There's something really heretical about the Grail mysteries and about, the practice we just did, because it's an acknowledgement that if the Grail is my heart, what does the Grail contain? It contains the blood of Christ. So Christ is God made human. Christ, in this sense, is differentiated from Jesus. So there's Jesus, the historical figure, the human teacher, that may have been, semi-divine or fully divine or whatever, but the cosmic Christ is the Christ principle within all of us. And so what you're saying is the blood in my veins is the blood of God. And this gets to, I'm going to be kind of like going, a little all over the place, because there's so many streams that flow into the Grail mysteries. One of them is the Sufi stream. There is an idea that's prominent in Sufism that I think exists across various traditions, various esoteric traditions, which is that there is no God that I can find in the external world. And when they built the Hubble telescope, they didn't find some big bearded guy up there angrily, waving his finger at us for, masturbating or whatever people, think of God as. So there is no God in this phenomenal world that I'm encountering. Nevertheless, God is. So God is nothing but the feeling of love that rides the blood. That there's an acknowledgement of transcendent divinity, of the formless absolute, this sort of really abstract, like, the one without even the concept of a two. That is acknowledged. And then the pair to that is the God that is only where she is felt. That sensation that I experience in the heart and in the blood, if that's there, then God is there. And if that's not there, then God is not there. And so that's where I wanted to begin. So from there, I want to go into kind of more some of the lasting symbols. The Grail is such an enigmatic story full of all these lasting archetypes that still have a deep hold on the collective unconscious, and still hold a lot of power on the inner plane in a way that A lot of other, a lot of fairy tales don't. A lot of myths don't. And yet the Grail and the Arthurian mythos seems somehow more alive. And so I want to start with the sword and the stone before we get to the Grail itself. So most people, this is probably the one thing that people know, if they've heard of Arthur and the Arthurian tradition. They know about the sword and the stone. And so when Arthur is born, Arthur's conception is magical. So Merlin, so Uther Pendragon, Arthur's father, is in love with this woman who's married to another king he's kind of a bad time. He's maybe evil or something. And Uther's just totally in love with her, and she's not necessarily happy with him. And so Merlin does this thing where he magically makes Uther Pendragon appear to be this woman's husband so that they can meet and unite, they can have sex. And so they do that. And then her actual husband ends up dying in a battle somewhere. But this boy that is conceived doesn't know who his father is. It's never revealed to him who his actual father is. Uther Pendragon is a king of the Britons. And so Arthur grows up in obscurity. Arthur grows up thinking he's ordinary. Arthur grows up in a foster situation where his mom isn't involved. Basically, Merlin kind of like gives him to this family who he respects and gives them some money. And so one day when he's like 12 or something, all these knights are around, there's a big tournament announced, and all of a sudden there's this anvil or this stone that is found with the sword sticking out of it. And on the sword it says, whoever can pull the sword from the stone shall be the rightful king of England, or of Britain, more accurately. And no one can pull it out. Arthur's this little squire, doesn't think he's anyone, and he shows up and all of a sudden he can pull the sword from the stone. And there's obviously the other knights are mad and they're threatened. Hold on, I'm going to turn my phone on silent. But eventually it's acknowledged, and Merlin comes forward and is like, nope, this is your destiny. Your real father was Uther Pendragon, and you're meant to be the king. And so there's a number of things in this story from a mystical perspective that are powerful. So one of them is the common trope of, not knowing who your real parents are. Or being a fatherless child. And so what this has to do with is, this is the Christian mysticism, heretical Christian mysticism side of it, is that when Christ says, like, I am a child of God, I'm the Son of God, he may not have been speaking as just him. That he had actually reached a station of consciousness where he experienced himself as almost an orphan from the world, and that his true parentage and his true heritage was divine. And so Arthur, similarly, there's this sort of magical conception, you grow up, this is, these myths are meant to be applied to you. And so you're growing up and you think, I'm just, regular kid among regular people. This can be everyone's experience, that at a certain point, there could be something that breaks into consciousness that I'm not only just an almost accidental product of just like two people falling in love and having sex. That there might be something more happening here. There might be something more intentional here. And that intention, that divine impulse comes from the divine mind. And where does that realization lead? It leads to whosoever can pulleth this sword from this stone will be the rightful king of Britain. It leads to sovereignty. Many, most of us, I can speak for myself, up until a certain point, most of us are in the passenger seat, whether we acknowledge that, whether that's a conscious thing. But for the most part, things are happening to us, things are happening at us, and we are reacting mostly through just preconditioned, external stimulus, conditioned chemical response, through our social programming, our cultural programming, the way that we were raised. And this is this common theme of the sense of being orphaned. And that is the sense of splitting and individuating from all of some of it useful, some of it really unhelpful, conditioning of our upbringing. And so this realization leads to sovereignty of maybe I'm in the driver's seat, or maybe I could learn to be in the driver's seat. Maybe I could be the driver, the sovereign of my small kingdom, my small sphere of influence. I could be making actual decisions and not just reacting. And the image of the sword and the stone is one that is really interesting from a mystical perspective, magical perspective. And the sword represents the mind. And you see this across many traditions. You have the sword of Prajna in Buddhism. That's the sword of piercing insight. And the sword suit in the tarot is the suit of air, which relates to the mental world. And the sword is the principle of the line, that if you have an infinite, undifferentiated expanse, the sword or the line is that which makes this is on one side and this is on the other side. And so we might, later on when we get to talking about the Grail and the lance, we might take issue with that sense of dualism. But for the time being, this is actually a really important thing, because that sword differentiates what is helpful to me on my path and what is not helpful. What is holding me back and limiting me, and what is moving me forward so that I can be of greatest service. Because the king isn't just like, and we can and should degender this to a certain extent. And so the monarch, the sovereign, is not just there, yes, historically this was probably the case, but esoterically, like, the sovereign is not there just because it's fun to be king or queen or sovereign or monarch or whatever. The ideal is that they are meant to orchestrate, to keep harmony in their whole kingdom, to bring abundance, to bring prosperity, to bring even to wake people up, to bring people, and there's an intimate relationship with the land. There's all of these things. And so the sense of the discriminating faculty, the sword, as separating, this is actually limiting my usefulness to people. And this is going to bring me into a position where my station of consciousness and conduct is being raised so that I can be of greatest service. That's the mental faculty. And so the sword is stuck in the stone or the anvil. And the stone or the anvil is the body. And I don't, like, I'm an integral yogi, or I'm an integral Sufi, or I'm an integral whatever, in the sense that I'm not transcendent. I'm not like, this world is bad, the body is bad, we're trapped in this flesh prison, all of this language. And ultimately, I think that is an unhelpful obstacle, and it's a product of kind of patriarchal devaluing of the feminine principle. And so the body is not a problem, the body is not an obstacle, but the sense of the sword being stuck in the stone, the mind or breath, we could use those synonymously because the sword is also air elementally, should be able to be taken out of the body, partially so that the body can relax, so that the body isn't constantly being activated and churned up by constant discursive nonsense. Our constant thinking, our constant winning arguments against people that, wronged us in the 5th grade, and, proving ourselves right in our head, just this, this narration. That separating the sword from the stone is to let the body actually rest. And in order to separate the sword from the stone, the sword, you don't want the sword to become smaller or less sharp or something like that. And so what actually needs to happen is that the stone, the body, needs to relax its grip on the stone. And so the sovereign is one who can, or maybe has been trained to, because I'm going to get into, like, I do think that there's evidence of an initiatory tradition, and that is preserved partially in the Arthurian corpus. But to pull the sword from the stone must relax, or to pull the breath out of identification with the body must be trained to truly rest. And that's something that, at the time of Arthur in 600 AD or whatever, people probably had people had less hard of a time with than we do now. Our culture is here. I'm going to close my door real quick. Our culture is, from an Ayurvedic perspective, incredibly vata. It's incredibly just go, 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 think, think, think. You're on your phone. Everyone needs to talk to you 24/7. The sense of just sitting there has been lost. And so I think that this is something that's a really transformative and really important message that we can pull from the Arthurian tradition in our current time, that's even more relevant now than it was when these stories were written, which is starting in about the late 1100s, is when we see the first surviving manuscripts that use the word Grail. And so that's the sword and the stone. In order to gain sovereignty, you have to be able to pull the mind, pull the breath out of identification with the body, and allow the body to relax its identification with the mind, so that each can be wielded separately. And as far as how to do this, like, hopefully this summer, I'm going to be teaching some sort of like actual full classes with a lot more of a practice element. But what is it? Like yoga nidra is in my experience the most developed practice or psycho-spiritual technology for actually doing this. So that's the sword and the stone. And then from there, I want to move to the other sort of central image, which is the Grail itself. And for people unfamiliar with the Grail romances, the Grail is never carried alone. The Grail is always carried with the lance. I'm going to go over kind of like later on, I'm going to go over like actually sort of telling a really brief synopsis of the Grail story, at least early versions of it. But just for now, just the main image of basically this knight arrives at this weird castle with this wounded king, and they're sitting eating a feast, and all of a sudden no one explains why this is happening. It's very strange. Angelic music is, like starts happening, and the room fills with light, and this woman holding this chalice, and this person carrying this spear or lance that is bleeding from the tip, sometimes into the chalice, is carried in a procession through the room. Everyone stops in awe. And then when the procession goes out, everyone just goes back to eating. So somewhat, almost too obviously, we have the yoni and the phallus, the yoni lingam. So we have the phallic lance and the yonic cup or chalice. And I do think that that's relevant, but often in like commentary, I see like people just reduce it to like, oh, it's just about sex and fertility, as if these aren't cosmic principles, like the Vav and the final He in the Tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He in Kabbalah or in Jewish mysticism. The Vav being the phallus, and the He final being the yoni. So the lance, so we talked about how the sword is the principle of the line, the discriminating, separating faculty. The lance is used differently. You don't slash with a lance. It's all vector. It's just a straight line going into a point. All of the force is delivered by the tip of the lance. And so the principle is that of the point. So if you have an infinite, undifferentiated expanse, the metaphor I like to use is, if anyone has done any sacred geometry, you have your paper. Paper is blank. So you have your, do I have these things right here? I don't know where my straight edge is, but you have your straight edge, and you have your compass, and then you have the actual pencil or the thing that does the drawing on the compass. So that point is the lance principle. And then the chalice is the principle of the circle. So where the sword, the line delineates between left and right, now we've got two sides. The circle is a container. The circle delineates inside and outside. And so the circle is a principle of inclusion, of enclosure, of containment. And so it's related often to the womb. And so you could say that the dot, the point, the lance represents the sperm, and the circle, the chalice, represents the egg. And from that, everyone here was produced. The spear also represents the force of the will. So the spear is the, the suit of fire, is wands in the tarot. And so it's sort of the primal spark, the force of the will, also like passionate, fiery emotion. And then the cup is intuition, imagination, things like this. And from the union of like passionate will and intuitive imagination, that is how everything is manifested from a magical perspective. So in terms of like, there's lots of talk of like manifestation magic and, like new age manifestation stuff. Without being empowered by that fiery like force of the will, the things that you're visualizing, the things that you're trying to manifest, are not complete. And if you have a lot of fiery directed will, but don't have the ability to contain it within an image in the unconscious, within an image in the imagination, with, that's guided by intuition, then that's not going to come to fruition either. And so those are the teachings that I wanted to present around these two kind of central images from the Grail corpus. Just before we go on to some other things, does anyone have any questions? Cool. So the next thing I wanted to do was kind of tell the Grail story. Percival, the knight, the Grail knight. So he's born, unsurprisingly, he doesn't have a father, and he lives with his mother. He had a bunch of other, brothers, but they all died going off and being knights. And his dad was a great knight, and he died being a knight. So his mom hates knights, and so she's like, my son, the last part of my family that I have left is not going to be a knight. I'm not even going to tell him what a knight is. I'm going to keep him, they live in the woods in seclusion. And he grows up, and of course he naturally is going to be a knight. And so he grows up and he's like playing with sticks that he like pretends are lances, even though he's never seen a lance. He rides the horses around on their little farm and does all this stuff. And one day he's playing and he sees some knights in full plate armor, and the sun is hitting them. And he runs up to them and he says, "Are you angels?" And they laugh at him and they go, "No, we're knights." And he's like, "What the fuck is that?" And they explain, we fight people for good and keep people, whatever they say the knighthood is about. And he's like, "Wow, that's so cool. Like, and you have this really cool king." And they're like, "Oh yeah, King Arthur. He's like the greatest. He's like this enlightened being. He's so amazing. You have no idea. Like his court is beautiful, everything." And so of course he's obsessed. And so he goes back inside and he tells his mother, "Mom, I'm going to be a knight. I'm going to go join King Arthur's court. I'm going to go to the round table. And I'm going to, pledge myself to be a knight." And she's like, tries to talk him out of it. Her heart is broken and he's just dead set on it. So eventually he leaves to go on his quest to be a knight. And he does so without any regard for his mother. And his mother lets him go because she loves her son. But when he leaves, he doesn't even turn around to wave as she's, standing on her step now totally alone. And she dies in that moment of heartbreak. This will come back later to haunt him. So, but before she dies, she's told him a few things. So she's told him, you know, if a if anyone, but especially if a woman ever like gives you something, you should like accept it gratefully. If you see, you know, if you see a church, you should go in for mass. Like these kind of like basic things. He grew up very naive. He doesn't really know anything about the world. He just has a lot of will, you could say. And and so he goes on his way and immediately misinterprets everything that she said. So the first thing he does is first person he encounters is this woman in a tent. And he goes in, barges into the tent, and he's like, "Hey, lady." And she's like, "Ah, who are you?" And she's like kind of making this weird face, and he doesn't know anything. And so she thinks that she's like trying to kiss him. And so he's like, "Oh, I have to accept that. My mom said that this was good manners." And so he sort of comically is like, "Yeah, sure." And then like kisses her. And she's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And she points at her ring, and she's like, "I'm married." And he's like, "Oh, she's offering me her ring." And so he takes off her ring and is like, "Thanks for the ring, lady." And then leaves. This too will come back to haunt him. You know, he makes his way to you know, this tiny little, it's not a monastery, it's not a church, it's just this like hermit cell in the middle of the woods where this Christian mystic is just, you know, there in prayer. And he sees it and he barges in. It's not even Sunday, he doesn't care, and he's just demands like, "Let's do mass right now." And this poor hermit's like, "Ah, you're so intense," like, you know. And so all of these things he's misinterpreting. He's just rude. He's just all force, all just like passion. He's just driven. And he finally makes his way to the court of Arthur. And he again barges in and is like, "Hey everyone, I'm going to be the greatest knight in all the land. Just so you know, so I'm pledging my service to, I want to be a knight of the round table." And everyone's like, "First of all, we're eating. Second of all, no, we don't know you. Nobody knows you. There's no stories about you. You don't have any fame. You don't have any like, you're not renowned as some honorable knight. No one's ever heard of Percival." And just as they're kind of like not knowing what to do with him, this this knight in red armor barges in and walks right up to the queen, steals the cup out of her hand, splashes it in her face, and then runs off with the cup. She's like drinking wine. And everyone is horrified. Everyone's just in shock. And so he runs after this knight. And he has no armor. He has nothing. He's got some javelins that he made by himself that are just wood. And so he's trying to fight this knight. And he's like, "You know, I challenge you." And the knight's like, "No, you're like 12 and some peasant boy. Like, I'm in full plate armor and have a sword. That's not going to happen." And so the young Percival throws his javelin and it goes right through the eye of the Red Knight. And so what he does is he takes off the Red Knight's armor and puts it on himself and becomes the Red Knight. We'll return to kind of do some like analysis of some of these things. But so basically at this point, he's determined he's got to make a name for himself. And so he just goes out saving people, you know, doing things that he feels like are heroic. He falls in love at some point. All of these things. And every knight he defeats, you know, when the knight begs for mercy, "Please, you know, don't kill me. Like, I'll do whatever you want." And he says, "Okay, go submit yourself as a hostage to Arthur's court." So back in Arthur's court, like just night after night is showing up, just like bandaged and bloody and being like, "This Red Knight, you know, defeated me and said I had to come here. And so I'm honoring my word." And so his renown is growing. And eventually he meets Gournemont. Gournemont is an old, wizened knight. And Gournemont initiates him into chivalry, into knighthood. And he gives him a new set of rules. So his mother gave him certain rules, and Gournemont gave him a different set of rules. And these rules are all about elegance. They're all about gracefulness. They're all about kind of sophistication and right action. And, there's a bunch of different things, but one of them is, you're too, like, you can't just walk into a courtroom and just be like, wow, cool tapestry on the wall. That's awesome. Where'd you get that? Like, you don't need to be making such a big deal out of everything. If you see things that are wondrous, you don't need to say anything about them. Often it's off-putting, it's rude. And then he goes on his quest, and eventually he's passing a lake and sees this king fishing in the lake. The king is lame. The king is paralyzed or wounded in some way. And so he waves to the king, and the king is like, shouts from the boat, like, hey, meet me at my castle. Like, I'm happy to put you up for the night. So he goes to the castle and he finds that the king somehow has gotten there before him. The king in some stories is actually laying on a bed because he can't move. He's wounded in his thigh. And this is the moment at which, the king is very welcoming, and the Grail procession that we just talked about, the lance and the chalice is carried through the room. And because Gornemont said so, he doesn't ask. He's curious, why is the king wounded? Like, what's going on here? All these things are very wondrous, but I want to be polite. I want to be sophisticated. I want to be elegant. I want to be a good knight. And so he doesn't ask any questions of what he sees. And he goes to sleep. And when he wakes up, the castle is gone. Everything's gone. And he's confused and he's wandering around, and he encounters this woman who's weeping. And he's like, my lady, what's wrong? How can I help? And she yells at him. And it turns out that this is the woman from the tent, the first person he encountered, that he incredibly, rudely, kissed and stole her ring, all these things. And she's like, you have no idea how badly you fucked up. You have doomed everything, because this whole kingdom is a wasteland. And, in the Grail kingdom, around it, nothing will grow. The water isn't flowing. The trees don't bear fruit. The animals are barren, all of these different things. And she's like, you would have healed the king and healed the wasteland if you'd only asked the question. But because you didn't, you've doomed everything. And not only that, and he's like, but why are you weeping? Is it because of that? And she's like, no, it's because my husband, hates me and hits me because he thinks that I cheated on him with you. You caused this. And so then the husband comes up and he's being mean to her, and he runs to her defense and he's like, you're the one who cheated, or who my wife cheated on me with. And so he fights the husband and then wins. And then the husband begs for mercy, and he makes the husband swear to defend and respect and uphold his wife at all costs and in all circumstances. And you see this throughout the Arthurian mythos. Part of the main thing that is preserved in the Arthurian stories is goddess worship. And so in Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, there's the vow that the Knights of the Round Table take is actually in there. And the first thing is that you have to defend a woman in need. You have to protect women. And we can take issue with that as far as, savior complex stuff, but just for the time and for the context, and also the subtext of this is there is this worship and this reverence for the feminine that was so absent from the surrounding culture and from the Orthodox Christianity of the time. And so Percival is heartbroken, and the story goes a million places from there, but basically the story is about the knight, which is you, trying to harmonize this kind of brutish this like pure, passionate, like I'm just obsessed, I'm so driven, I'll stop at nothing to be a knight. All right, my mom said this very kind of unsophisticated, unrefined expression, but very authentic expression. It's totally just in the moment. It's totally arising from, sometimes you could say, just animal impulses, but it's true, it's real, it's passionate, it's raw. And trying to balance that with the sense of sophistication, the sense of delicacy and elegance and, gracefulness and right action. And so in Kabbalah, both my areas of, areas that I've received instruction in are Hasidic Kabbalah and Hermetic Kabbalah. So Jewish and sort of Neoplatonic or magical. They're both magical, but and in both systems you have, I wish I had my whiteboard handy, but I don't. You have on the tree of life, you have the bottom sphere of Malkut, the kingdom. Then you have Yesod, which is sort of the bridge, the watery, the liquid conductor through which the electricity of the entire rest of the tree passes into the vessel of Malkut. And then you have on either side, you have Netzach and Hod. So Netzach means victory. Hod means elegance, basically. And so the whole story is about trying to balance elegance, Hod, with Netzach, victory. And this is also in Kabbalah, the masculine and feminine pillars. And so that masculine pillar of Netzach, the sphere or the planet in Hermetic Kabbalah associated with it is Venus. And so it seems strange. Why would Venus be on the masculine pillar, in the sphere called victory, which is kind of brutish and like, sort of aggressive? But this is often how we experience love. This is often how we experience Venus. And the illustration I like to give is one of an artist who is absolutely possessed by a vision of a painting. And this artist becomes so driven, so passionate about that they fall in love with this vision, and they don't have the technical skills, so they might they're drawing, they can't get the hand quite right, so they stay up all night drawing hand after hand after hand after hand, and then they finally get the thing, and at the end of it they're almost a broken person. They've lost touch with all their friends. People are like, well, you've gone crazy, you've lost it. But they've produced something that is so beautiful. And so that's kind of that's the extreme of Netzach, is like the Hulk doesn't knock on the door. The Hulk's just like smashing through shit, just like so driven. So that's one extreme. And then the other extreme is, I don't want to say that this is an extreme, this is this in application. If you've ever been to a Japanese Zen tea ceremony, it takes 4 hours. A full tea ceremony takes 4 hours. So you're not drinking tea for 3 hours. They, everything, the way that they wipe the cup, and then the way that they, with a cloth, and the way that they hand the cup to you, the way that they pour it, the way that they set it back, every element is so refined. And you could call that almost a ritual of Hod, a ritual of elegance, gracefulness. But the extreme of this is someone who's so scared of not being elegant, someone who's so scared of, oh, I don't want to step on any toes, I don't want to make anything uncomfortable, I don't want to, say something that someone doesn't like or someone finds offensive or something, so I'll just never speak. And so that's the situation of the Grail Knight. That is the balance that is trying to be struck, that is worked out through the Grail story. And we're kind of talking after this. Go look up a picture of the Tree of Life. I wish I had one with me, just because to me it's like so visual. But in this case, we're working our way up the tree. And so Netzach and Hod actually unite in Tifaret, which is the heart. And so this again comes back to the Grail as the heart. That when he actually gets to truly encounter the Grail, and in some cases, either him or his twin brother marries the Grail maiden, which is almost the same as the Grail procession in terms of the lance and the chalice. But it's only after he's balanced those, he's working his way up the tree, and he has to balance Hod and Netzach, and only then can he reach Tifaret, which in Hermetic Kabbalah is also knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, or what is called in yoga self-realization. Self-realization is below God realization. So it's the encounter and marriage with the inner self. And I don't know how useful it is to talk about these things because they're not beliefs, they're experiences. And then the last story, how I wanted to end, and then we'll have some time for questions. And I hope you have questions. I love questions. Is another story that isn't the Grail story. It's another Arthurian story called the Knight of the Cart, or the Lancelot romance. And in this story, you have right at the beginning, Queen Guinevere. She's taken by this evil knight. She's captured and taken away and locked up in some tower, evil tower, by an evil king. And, I think that there's important critiques of this whole maiden in need of rescuing thing. But it is important when relating to it, like those critiques can still stand. And she's the goddess, she's the presence. And so what this story is about right off the bat is it's about what happens when the felt presence of God, when she is taken from us, from our sphere of experience, or from the world. You see this in Kabbalah with the Shekhinah, or in exile after the fall of the Second Temple. You see it in the Ramayana, in ancient Hinduism. You see it all over the place. And so it's important to keep in mind that Guinevere isn't some lady. She's the goddess. And what she represents is the felt presence, that feeling that rides the blood, that sense that we live on the edge of a razor blade and go too far in either direction and there's no God. But we're walking this super fine line, trying to stay connected with the felt presence of the divine. Right? Instead of just being like, God's in his heaven, it's like the goddess is here in my blood, in my heart. And so Lancelot, who the story is about, the protagonist. Lancelot and the entire round table take off to go rescue the queen. And Lancelot is actually not a knight of the round table. He's never pledged himself to the round table or to Arthur, because he is pledged to Guinevere. He's in love with Guinevere. And for a very brief period of time, there was this phenomenon of courtly love, which was erotic mysticism that was almost purely adulterous. Because at that point, the church had taken love to be a bad thing. Love was too dangerous a force. And so marriages had nothing to do with love. That wasn't even necessarily something that people thought was possible, or something that was talked about. Love was even thought of as sinful in the church. And during the late 1100s, early 1200s, there was in the south of France, I think south of France, in the Occitan area, there were these two women who held court. And there was this beautiful flowering of poetry and music and artwork and all of these things, right? At the heart of the height of the so-called Dark Ages, there was this massive explosion, because first of all, it was about what happens if women are running things. This is where we get Chartres Cathedral. It was, I think it was Marie de France who was the patroness of Chartres Cathedral, who was involved in its building. And there's all of these very, everything is built around a 13-pointed star. There's all of this sacred geometry and kind of hidden mysticism there. And they held these courts of love, and where lovers, people who loved each other, generally, often one or both of them would be married to someone else, and this was not seen as a problem. Because as long as marriage was just about preserving, this is where norms of monogamy and all these things, it's about and passage of a name and title along the male line is about preserving the integrity of the male line. So as long as a woman was producing children, this is fucked up, but this is what was going on, then it was like, she could do whatever she wanted. There was no concept of cheating. And also this comes from ancient Celtic, like pagan, very, very different norms around sexuality and gender, where monogamy was not a concept to the ancient Celts. And so you had these courts of love, and these queens would literally preside over this court, and lovers would come and they would, like present their case about, what do I do in this case? Is it okay to love this woman even though another knight is trying to woo her, and things like that? And we actually have records of all of this stuff. And so out of that comes the Arthurian tradition. And so Lancelot is considered this superhuman, super-powered, like nuclear bomb. If you look at a lot of Arthurian romances, they'll say, they'll be about this night or that night. And they'll say things like, he was the greatest knight except for Lancelot, because Lancelot was not fighting for honor. Lancelot was not fighting for the round table. Lancelot was not fighting for Arthur. He was fighting for love, for Guinevere. And hold on. And so all the knights take off to go rescue Guinevere in this story. And Lancelot, everyone's looking for her. No one knows where she is. Lancelot comes to this town, and there's this man driving a cart, a shame cart. And there's all these people, there's like bars on the back of the cart, and there's all these people, and they committed whatever, supposed sins or committed a crime. People like throwing fruit and being like, you're worthless, you know, you have no honor, you're shamed in front of everyone. And so the cart driver says, hey, you're looking for Guinevere. I know where she is, but I'll only tell you if you get in the cart. And he hesitates. And he's like, you want to know where she is? And he's like, he hesitates for another step. And then he takes off running, gets in the cart. And he's humiliated, and word of his shame spreads far and wide. And he's like, this better fucking be worth it. And so the driver tells him where she is. There's other elements of the story, but I want to make sure that I leave time for questions. And so finally he arrives at this magical kingdom where this evil king has her, you know, up in a tower somewhere. And he's, you know, gone on this arduous quest. You know, he shows up and he's just covered in blood. Like he's just like wounded and like on the verge of death. And even, you know, this evil king is like, okay, you can fight me for her. You know, if you're challenging me, you can fight, but like, I'll give you a month to recover. And Lancelot's just like, no, let's do it tomorrow. And so it's this sense of total love, total devotion. And he finally sees Guinevere, his beloved, right? He sees the goddess, he encounters the presence. And he's been felt distant from the divine presence for so long. And he sees her and he just falls at her feet. And he's like, I love you so much. It's so good to see you, you know, all these things I did. It was so hard getting here, but like I would have done, even if it was way harder, like I would have been happy to have died in service of trying to help you. And she won't even speak to him. She won't even look at him. And he's like, what? Why? And his heart just breaks. And he's like, why does my lady, my beloved, hate me? And so he, you know, fights the evil king. And, you know, I forget the order of events, but basically later he sees Guinevere again, and then now she's nice. Now she's being nice to him. And he's like, my lady, like, why wouldn't you speak to me earlier? And she's like, because you hesitated for 2 steps. And so this on the Tree of Life, you know, go look up an image later and you'll see why I'm gesturing like this, is the 2 pillars above. So Hod and Netzach, and then Chesed and Gevura. So Chesed is on the masculine pillar. This is the traditional language. And Chesed means loving kindness. Chesed is just beneficence, devotion, mercy, like, you know, like this really altruistic love. And on the other end of things, you have Gevura on the feminine pillar. And Gevura is karma. You could call this grace in the sense of like divine grace or blessings. It would be maybe a better way of putting that. So divine blessings and karma. And so karma is about, you know, there being consequences, there being boundaries, all of these things. It's also interesting because the planet associated with Gevura is Mars. And so you have Mars on the, you know, on the feminine pillar, and we often associate Mars with the masculine. But this is at, you know, on the inner plane or in the subtle worlds is how these things are manifesting. And this story perfectly illustrates the relationship where Chesed is devotion. Chesed, from our perspective, we experience it coming at us as grace, as blessings. But when we're, putting it out into the world, it's devotion, it's loving kind, may all beings be free. Like, I just love you so much. I go to the ends of the earth. Like, I will accept any suffering if it makes your suffering less, like these types of things. And there can be a boundarylessness about that. And then on the other side, we have Gevura, which is about boundaries, which is about karma, consequences. And Guinevere embodies Gevura when she won't speak to him. Why won't you talk? Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you look at me? She said, because you hesitated for 2 steps. Your chesed was not complete. It was equivocated. There was some hesitation in your devotion to the divine quest, because we're reaching towards the divine marriage. And this is more, we're talking about God realization here, is as opposed to self-realization. We're talking about like, annihilation in God is how it would be put in Sufi terms. And there's a tradition that there was a world before this one made where there was no chesed, there was no loving kindness or grace from the divine. That wasn't an aspect of it. And it collapsed immediately. Because everything that we do, you could kick a rock and it could start a chain reaction. And in a world without chesed would start a chain reaction that would lead to the collapse of the entire universe. And it is only because of grace that our universe is stable. And there's also something illustrated perfectly by this story, is that on the spiritual path, as opposed to Netzach and Hod, which really have to be balanced, you need more chesed than Gevura. Because Gevura is the force. Chesed is like, oh, I'm so excited about this new project. Like, it's going to be so cool. Like, I'm getting, people are going to love it. It's going to be a huge success, whatever the thing is. Or I'm so excited about, embarking on this spiritual path. It's going to be great. And Gevura is the naysayer. Gevura is like, you don't have enough money for that. What are you going to do? That's not possible. Like, there's all these boundaries. There's all these obstacles in the way. Who do you think you are, type of thing. And so our chesed needs to be greater than our Gevura in order to overcome our inner critic and our inner sense of obstacles. And so that sense of hesitation in service of the beloved is taken as this story illustrates the necessity for total kind of devotion in order to attain the goal, which is union with the beloved, or rather a realization that there was no separation between us and the divine presence at all. So that's what I had prepared. But I want to hear you guys' questions. So either you can put them in the chat, you can unmute if you want to, you can do whatever makes you feel comfortable, but I love questions. They're all allowed. Or comments, compliments, anything, whatever you got.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And an appreciation. So I guess I'm new to a lot of this, but a lot of it was really resonant with the way you talked through all of it. So I'm just really appreciative for the symbolism and just more information on the stories. But my question is, just going back to the beginning when you actually had us um, do that practice where we connected with the light and the earth and with the Greek letters. I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that, or perhaps just refresh what that was, because I found that to actually be a really good embodied practice for getting to this knife's edge that we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. So that the text of it, it's written out. I think it's one of the first posts on the Patreon. So if you scroll down, you'll be able to find that. But as far as, so it's you start out with the Greek letter alpha, and so it's like that, and then omega. So in the book of Revelations, Christ says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega." But that phrase, I'm pretty sure, is actually older and comes from the Hermetic tradition. The sense of being the first and the last, that or in Islam and Sufism, it would be Hu Allahu Ahad, Allahu As-Samad, is from the Surah Al-Ikhlas. And that means God is one, but one without even the concept of two. So God is one without comparison, or without equal, or without anything else. And Allahu As-Samad Samad means the source, the cause, the goal, the end point, the beginning, the end, the entire path. And so it's sort of your one, that was used a lot in Christian talismans, and not even explicitly Christian, but just within the world where Christianity was a kind of symbolic language people were familiar with. You have the Alpha and the Omega as a common kind of thing invoking divine power. But it's also, you're connecting with, I am the beginning, I am the end. So by embodying the letters, by spelling them out with your body, they're not separate, they're not out there. You're proclaiming at a cellular level, this is what I actually am. My true parentage is divine, you could say. And the crossing the arms over the chest and turning your head to the left, you form the Greek letters Chi Rho, which looks like a P and an X. And that was, again, a really, really common and very powerful kind of talismanic or sigil within, Christian symbolism. And I think it's in Greek, it's the first letter of Jesus and the first letter of Christ, maybe. And so again, by forming it with your body, you're identifying with it, and you're communicating that identification with your, at a cellular level. And then as far as, you start with calling from above. So this is the formless absolute that we were talking about. This is the, Shiva, is in a tantric sense, like Shiva and Shakti. So Shiva is pure consciousness, just total, formless, absolute, abstract, just pure consciousness. And then Shakti is form and power. And so Shakti is the immanent, and Shiva is the transcendent. And in the goddess tantra lineages, Shakti is seen as instead of, that sense of okay, here's Shiva as sort of the up, and then Shakti is the down, or the far and the close, you could say. It's sort of like a Shakti sandwich. So it's like Shakti, the power, the impulse or possibility of consciousness gives birth to consciousness itself, which gives birth to the power of consciousness in form. Sort of confusing, but basically when you're pulling from above, the white, and again, white and red is a, Ida and Pingala Nadi in the yogic traditions. You see it a lot in alchemy. Part of it has to do with menstrual blood and semen. That the red, the dynamic, the imminent, like feminine principle, and the white sort of like, more like aloof or cosmic masculine principle. So you start by calling the formless absolute into the chalice, and then you connect with the center of the earth. This is the immanent presence. This is Shakti, red, that you're calling up, and you're mixing the red and the white. So you're mixing the sperm and the egg, you're mixing the masculine, the feminine, you're mixing the felt presence and the formless absolute. You are enacting the divine marriage within the subtle heart every time you do the practice. And by sort of like pressurizing it, you're deepening into a somatic experience of that, and it's getting brighter and more intense and more intense. And then, when you exhale, like purifying your energetic body, your body-mind complex. And in Sufism, it's like there's nothing new is learned. Everything is already known. It's just remembered. And so it's not so much a process of, oh, I have to become something other than I am. It's I have to kind of dig myself out from all of these sort of things that I've internalized, all this conditioning, all this nonsense that has been, this dirt that has been thrown onto the mirror of my heart. And when you polish the mirror of the heart, it just reflects its true nature. The true nature of the human is this infinitely huge possibility for consciousness. God is the blueprint of human consciousness. And so you're engaging with all of that, and then ending with, blessed be the Sangreal. You're again communicating at a really deep level. The blood that flows through my veins is the blood of God. And also feeling into that sense of God's not out there. There's nothing out there. God's right here. In the Quran, it says God is closer to you than the pulse is to its echo in the jugular vein. Which I think is it's a good image to work with the practice. But as far as like, if you want to continue with the practice, it's down. Yeah, I think it was one of the first posts I did on.
Connor, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe it's pedantic, but Percival's story at the beginning, it's like very, in his like naivety and ignorance is prominent in the story. Mm-hmm. And I don't really get, is there like a significance to that? Because it could easily have just been a kid who grew up with these aspirations, and then the rest of the story could proceed as it does. But it's very clear that, at least in that first writing, that he's anything but that. And I'm wondering if there's some significance that I'm missing as far as that goes.
So it's interesting because I like that you clarified, like, at least in the early versions, because in the later versions you have Galahad, which we don't have time to get into, but Galahad is this like kind of boring character because he's just perfect. He's the perfect knight from day one. His entire birth situation, he's a knightly embodiment of Christ. And that to me is less interesting because that's not my experience. And so part of it, from a Jungian sense, it's like it starts out and he's just in the oceanic kind of like womb of the mother for the first part of his life, and he's totally undifferentiated. Like he doesn't know anything about anything. He's totally naive. He's totally sheltered. He's totally, he's totally taken care of. He's totally all these things. One thing I left out of the story, but when the woman from the tent is like, yelling at him, she's also like, and you killed your mother from a broken heart. So to add to this sort of litany of ways in which his just sort of excited, like little kid, little boy, like energy had hurt all of these people without his knowledge. And so I think that without that element, you wouldn't have that sense of the balancing of Netzach and Hod, because it's very Netzach to be unaware of, like, way imbalanced Netzach is you're unaware of the impact that you're having in the world. You're making a scene at the dinner table and you think you're just having a nice time, but everyone is like, oh my God, like what, calm down. You're in public right now. I don't know why this is, whatever. And so I think that that's part of it. I think that the other thing is that, like I said, there's, I believe, evidence of an actual lineage initiatory body here. And there were knightly orders. A lot of the ones that we have more of a record of come later, and many of them were maybe not so esoteric. But I think there was something. There was, a spiritual tradition that at least was using the language of knighthood to transmit something powerful that still resonates. And so he's also the archetypal fool. Like the tarot starts out with the fool stepping off the cliff, because that's the initiate. You show up and you're just like, I want to do this thing. And you're, in the Waite Smith image, he's not looking down. He's not looking at his feet. He's not looking where he's going. He's not looking if he's stepping on anyone's toes. He's not looking if he's walking off a cliff, and he walks right off the cliff. And because he's looking at this beautiful flower. And so that's Percival in the beginning, is the initiate who steps into initiation not knowing. Hazrat Nag Khan said, initiation is a step in a direction which you do not know. And my experience having taken initiation into the lineage of Hazrat Nag Khan is I would almost like take that a step further and say initiation is a step in a direction which you cannot conceive of. That you could step forward, you could step backward, you could step right, you could step left, and you could step this other direction, almost in, if you can kind of like conceptualize that, or like into some other dimension or something. And you have no way of conceptualizing that when you show up. And so taking a step in a direction which you do not know is the nature of the fool and the nature of the initiate. And so I think that that's why that's highlighted and emphasized. His naivety is because he's the uninitiated. But it's interesting because then he sort of receives initiation, and then that causes problems too, because now he's got all these ethical codes of conduct and whatever other teachings he received, and that limits. He was fucking dumb and like kind of causing problems and causing harm, but also he was totally authentic. And so there's also an alchemical thing here, and I could go on this forever, but like of starting out with, in terms of like psychological alchemy, starting out from a place of unconscious authenticity and then coming to a place of conscious inauthenticity. Here, you have no idea what your neuroses are. You don't know you have neuroses. You're just out here, you know, bumbling around in the world totally unconsciously. And that may be working for you. It may not be working for you. It may be, you know, ego dystonic, and maybe ego syntonic, but basically you're just unaware. And all of a sudden you become aware of all these ways that you're problematic and neurotic and you know, and your thinking patterns are not helpful and all this stuff. And you go through a period of everything being very dry because you've come to conscious inauthenticity, where you are held back because you're too self-aware. Your self-awareness is hindering your ability to be embodied and authentic. And so to complete the process, and what often doesn't happen in therapy, is to come back to conscious authenticity, where you integrate all of that, and then you're able to, from this sort of like inner spring, just have stuff come up, and you're not with this meta narrative of like, is that neurotic? Is that bad? Is this problematic? Like, you know, constantly second guessing yourself and feeling like you're walking on psychic eggshells. And so that's kind of another way to express this Netzach and Hod situation. Any other questions? Also, this will be recorded. This is recorded. We are recording right now. And so whenever it's done downloading, maybe tonight or tomorrow, I will put it probably up on like a private YouTube, and then post it on the Patreon. So anyone who wasn't able to make it, or wasn't able to stay, or, you know, shows up in the future, can watch it. Any last questions, things? Cool. Well, may this talk be of benefit to the liberation of all beings, and we'll do this again next month. I don't know what the topic will be. It'll be a surprise, or maybe not. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And I will see you then.
Thank you.